Adam Bai and Tony Frost. Come on up, guys. First, we have Rachel, a strategic planner, expert with 14 years of experience in entertainment, culture, and media industries. She's held leadership positions at the Toronto International Film Festival, the Canadian Film Centre, Meta, Ardeo, and Samsung, where she oversaw marketing, research programming, and audience development. In her interactive narrative projects, among other things, she's a published writer and has served on several innovative juries, including the Canadian Media Fund. Rachel holds a master's degree in strategic foresight and innovation from OCAD and has consulted for the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission. She currently serves. Am I amplified? I should be amplified.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I couldn't before. Sorry.
Cancel. Oh, that was weird. Okay. An innovative studio focused on emerging technology. Next is Alicia. She's an assistant professor of learning technology at the University of North Texas and the director of the Surge VR Lab, where she leads the development and testing of technology for learning. She's an expert in emerging technologies like virtual reality and mixed reality, and is passionate about using technology to create engaging, effective, and inclusive learning experiences. Alicia has worked on numerous large-scale educational projects sponsored by organizations as the NIH, NSF, Department of Defense, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is an educator, researcher, and developer who is dedicated to improving the way we learn through technology. Last but not least, moderating this amazing panel is Adam Bai, Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Client Officer of Glimpse. Adam is an anthropomorphic of technology and innovation and has taught courses at several universities, including MIT and Columbia. He was of pioneering digital and collaborative learning company Nomadic Learning, where he served as editor-in-chief and as SVP of strategy and senior client partner. Adam has also consulted on related topics for a range of firms, including IBM, PepsiCo, AB InBev, and Nike. He's an expert in the field of technology and innovation and is currently leading strategy and client partnerships at Glimpse. And I'm happy to announce I just hit my steps for the day. That's what that little bell was. So you guys enjoy the panel, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say.
Okay, am I all set to begin? All right, so I want to thank everyone for joining. Hopefully I'm being heard. I'm not entirely sure if I am. The whole idea of this panel is to think about what it means to understand the metaverse. And that's a kind of deceptively difficult question, I think. So I just want to begin with a few remarks, and the whole purpose of this panel is really to foster a fascinating conversation between people who are differently located in the worlds of learning, agencies, research, etc. And I just had a couple points to begin with, and then we'll introduce the panelists. So I was thinking the other day that it's become really commonplace to remark that the metaverse is a difficult concept to define. And that's kind of like a pro forma thing that everybody says prior to talking about the metaverse or writing about it. And we've heard that again and again in this conference. It's almost like negative theology, where the only way to define God is by thinking about those things that God is not. And I've noticed that most definitions of the metaverse are primarily technical definitions. They're about platforms, AR, VR, interoperability, etc. Most obviously also mention immersive experiences. But this panel is a reminder that experience is by definition subjective, and just as importantly, that every experience is always already individual and social at the same time, even if we're in an immersive environment with no other people interacting with us in real time. So just as Wittgenstein argued so persuasively about language, we can't define the metaverse without accounting for its modes of use, its practical grammar, that is to say that it's an instrument or tool woven into social practice and economic production. So we also need to pay attention to not only what people do inside particular immersive environments, but how they talk about and imagine the metaverse before they even sign up for a place like we're in now. Which is why in the panel description, I wrote, the metaverse is a complexly emergent technical social assemblage in its earliest stages of growth and adoption. Its evolution depends upon the mindsets and behaviors, hopes and fears of people all over the world. Therefore, to only engage technocratic elites or programmers or executives about the metaverse is also to kind of replicate that error, to assume a narrowly technical definition of the metaverse, to shrink the field of inquiry and to kind of miss what the metaverse is and what its potential is. And this move doesn't make sense no matter what your goals are, whether they're making money through advertising, inquiry, or activism. So to conclude, I think there are two things that are simultaneously true. One is, as Marshall McLuhan said, the content of one communications medium is always initially derived from previous media forms. So if you think about like radio shows or plays on television in the 50s or the static web pages of the 90s, the same will be true of the metaverse, that our imaginations will be limited by Web 2.0. And then the second thing that's also true is that the most interesting uses of the metaverse don't yet exist. They'll take advantage of the technical potential of various platforms in newly emergent ways. So the best thing we can do is not only to keep our eyes open, but in the spirit of open and transparent inquiry, to pay attention to what people are doing and thinking and imagining with and within the metaverse. So that's the spirit of this panel. It's also the spirit of Glimpse's work with XRSI to figure out what people out in the world and people in this environment think about the metaverse, how they're planning to use it, what they're afraid of or anxious about, what they're excited about, what forms of interaction they imagine will be the most important or create the most value for their lives. And to that end, I want to really, really strongly encourage everyone to fill out the survey that was sent out to you. If you want to compare your responses as experts or participants in the event to those of everyone else. Yeah, I mean, without further ado, I've asked each of the panelists to just speak for a few minutes, introduce maybe 1 to 3 provocative claims or statements or questions about the metaverse and how we can understand it and research it, in the context of their various environments where they're experts, or domains of expertise. So I would love to start with Alicia.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think my voice is amplified, yes. So everyone should be able to hear me. Thank you, first of all, for including me on this panel, Adam. This is a really exciting thing to be involved with at the very beginning as we start thinking about XR safety. And I love that we get to be a part of building the world that we want to be living in. So it's an exciting time. I'm regularly encouraging my students to get engaged with design and development, but also with legislation in any way possible around these topics. So yes, my name is Alicia Hayes, and I am an assistant professor of learning technologies at the University of North Texas. And also I have a research lab that I actually started at Purdue and have moved to the University of North Texas called SURGE, which stands for Simulation, User Research, and Game Experience. And I am particularly interested in looking at the effects of technology. So obviously, when I'm looking at human-computer interaction, I'm excited to see how the metaverse affects people, but specifically using what we know already about the way we interact with technology to help inform design choices. So first, I think the first question Adam sent us in our document about this was thinking about what the metaverse is. And actually, it's one of the first questions in the survey that we send to all of you. Hopefully you will fill it out, because we really do want to see where people are at right now with the metaverse, and maybe in a couple of years compare where we're at now with where we're going to be, and people's attitudes and expectations of the metaverse. So for me, the metaverse is the next iteration of the internet, of course. So I'm sure most of you have heard of Web 1.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, Web 1.0 being that early internet that if any of you are as old as I am, oh gosh, then you probably remember things like Netscape, you know, and MySpace. And now we're into this place where we're interacting with one another and becoming more immersed. I probably would not say that we're there yet with the metaverse. I generally raise exception with people who say the internet is everything we can do, and we're already there with VR. Because I'm a VR researcher, I'm also kind of a VR cynic. So I expect the metaverse ultimately to be able to integrate all five of our senses, right? And we have technology for all of those things. We have things for olfactics to induce smell. We have things gustatory. We have things for auditory, obviously, and visual, as you guys can see, and tactile, haptic things that we can already use. And the concept of being able to fully immerse yourself in a place or space and interact with different people from all over the world. And of course, then there are many questions about what this includes, like, is the metaverse including AI and bots? And of course, I think most of us would say yes. And is representation in the metaverse supposed to be us looking like ourselves, or is it supposed to be us looking like what we imagine ourselves to be? And of course, the answer is yes, whatever we want it to be. That's why it's an amazing opportunity for us to be exploring the metaverse. And just really quickly, I will say that my research spans the applications of extended reality for education, training, and human interaction. And I'm particularly interested in looking at levels of immersion. And one of the things that I look at with levels of immersion is, when do we need to be fully immersed? Like, when is a Zoom call enough? When is face-to-face communication what we need? When is something like an immersive technology tool the best approach? And I would really encourage us to start thinking about this as an opportunity. The metaverse is an opportunity not to replace human interaction, but to augment it, because there are some things that we can only do in virtual worlds, and there are some things that we can only do in physical worlds for now. And I personally am still a humanist, so I still always will prioritize human-to-human interaction, but there are some things that I would love to be able to do, like dress up my friends in imaginary clothes in the metaverse, something I can't do now. But when I say levels of immersion, I want you to think about virtual reality versus mixed reality. Mixed reality being when we integrate virtual objects with physical objects. Now, how great will it be if we can do all of the things we imagine, but still feel like we're in our real world when we want to? But also, if we don't want to feel like we're in my messy living room right now, we can, go into a new place with new people, or the same people. I think I will end there with my comments to start. Maybe I think probably the last thing I should address is one of the research projects I'm currently working on is looking at how we can use extended reality for education for K-12 students. And there are many interesting ethical considerations for things like accessibility, access to the technology, and also thinking about resources for people with disabilities. So that's another area. If we want to get into that a little bit, we could also discuss. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. That's wonderful. I realized that Matt Burr, who's also here, never got introduced. So why don't we go with Rachel next, and then I will introduce Matt, and Matt can give his talk. Rachel, take it away, please.
Hey, everybody. I'm just being advised to move a little bit closer to Alicia, so I apologize for my moving and a shaking. So on my end, I mean, the metaverse really is kind of the next protocol of, like was mentioned, kind of, digital communications. 10 years ago, the Internet of Things was really hot, and brands around the world were trying to connect everything. And it was awkward and weird, but also, helped us get to where we are today. Obviously, there's some really new, amazing protocols that are enabling this. And the realization of it is a seamless experience across platforms. And my idealized state is actually we're really not behind screens anymore. So I'm going to probably say 60 to 70% of the things that we need screens for we'll be able to do natively, whether it's using wearables or swiping or LiDARs, whatever end up being. All of the different technologies are going to work in companionship, and some are going to, some are going to end up on the cutting room floor the way that, for example, like laser discs or compact discs. I mean, music leaves a trail of, transitional technologies and certain things. Like VR, what we're doing right now, this could be the laser disc of XR. Like it could be something we don't have to do when, AR gets enough. It could take a lot of these cases and really blow it out of the water. And then there's certain things that VR does make sense for. What I'm most interested in is taking the learnings that we've had from the last 20 odd years of like real sociability across channels, whether it's websites and social media channels and whatnot. Take the learnings, apply it, and get on top of it so that government and protocol and policy is at least at the same speed as the way technology is innovating. Caveat to that is it actually takes a really long time for us as humans to even adapt and adopt to new technology. So, last year the metaverse was hot and NFTs were, and a year from now it won't be called NFTs, they'll be called digital collectibles, and the metaverse will be called whatever it is, because most of it was hype, right? And a lot of us aren't ready. Even VR, it's been around for 15, 20 years. I mean, on a commercial side, because it's been around for 20, 30 years in large scale products and services, but a lot of us still want nothing to do with it. So we do have time, but in terms of enabling like the privacy and safety protocols, we're at such a really amazing juncture where if we can work with policy people and communicate, which, large commercial scandals or, data breaches that have come out, the Cambridge Analyticas of it all, have actually put this conversation in a good position, because the general public actually is now concerned with their data and the safety of it, and what people are doing online. And so there's a huge spotlight put on it. So it's a very, very exciting time right now. And in terms of the way experience design will be realized, it's yet to be determined, right? I mean, artists and creators and developers are going to continue to push and look for like utilities or wonder and awe moments that really are sticky for us. And I'm excited to see what's next. That's me.
Thanks, Rachel. That was great. So I want to introduce Matt Burr, who's graciously agreed to join us as well. Matt is co-founder and CEO of Nomadic Learning, which was, as was said in my own introduction, a pioneering, it is a successfully pioneering digital and social learning company that focuses on promoting social interaction between learners in order to create really amazing learning outcomes, and works with a lot of different corporate clients, as well as one academy that stretches across many different organizations. And Matt has a long history as an educator, setting up new environments and ecosystems for learning, and sort of rethinking the relationship between content and form and media form when it comes to learning experiences. So it is in that capacity that I asked Matt to come and to speak. You know, I know Matt is a bit of a skeptic when it comes to the metaverse's current capabilities when, you know, in terms of learning. But I wanted to hear more about why, and if Matt thinks that there are conditions under which the metaverse could become really useful and helpful and add a tremendous amount of value to the kinds of learning experiences that he's been trying to design with Nomadic. So take it away, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And sorry, I don't know if you see me keep appearing and disappearing. I'm having a very local technical problem where my daughter keeps stealing my headphones to her iPad. So that's a unique challenge. So yeah, I mean, Adam, just Matt, can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Yeah, I think I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right, so I'll keep talking.
Can you hear him, Adam?
No. Did you put it on the broadcast, the amplify button, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me now?
I can hear him and Burr just fine.
Okay, great, thank you. I think everyone can hear me except for Adam.
Yeah, Matt, you're amplified. You're good.
Okay, great. So I wouldn't, I think Adam described me as a skeptic, but I wouldn't really say that. I think that I'll give just a little background.
Rachel, can anyone else hear Matt?
We can all hear, just you, sucker.
We can all hear.
You're the only one that can't hear him.
That's very, very weird, right? Because I can hear everyone else.
Yeah, that's right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Are we having some kind of thing with each other, Adam?
I'll tell Adam. I'll tell you when
I can
he's
hear
done.
him.
Yeah. Yeah, Rachel will give you.
Keep
Rachel, your
I'll
job is
ask you questions and won't hear your responses later.
Okay.
It'll be recorded. You can hear it after.
Great.
Okay, so Rachel, your job is to tell Adam when I'm done talking.
Noted.
Okay, cool.
Please proceed, sir.
Okay, great. So yeah, so just a little bit of background about myself before we kind of get into whether I'm skeptical or not of this world. So Nomadic, our kind of bread and butter is very large, what we call digital academies, usually for large enterprise clients. It's always adult professional learning contexts, and the academies that we build and run serve anywhere from, 5,000. We for example, we run the marketing academy at Anheuser-Busch that serves about 5,000 people. And we run one of the world's largest community of HR professionals that serves about 50,000 people. So we think a lot about collaborative learning and digital learning that scales, and has a kind of how you can take a very large group of people and create meaningful, especially meaningful social and collaborative learning experiences that last over time. And so we are mostly focused on kind of softer skills, or at least that's, that would go by soft skills in the types of learning that we do. So less technical, and more in the kind of leadership or softer skill area. I think that sort of my perspective on all of this comes from watching over the last 20 years a kind of a variety of or a sort of similar pattern when new technologies come especially into enterprise learning, which is, can be clunky at first and can be difficult to adopt at first. And then there's a sort of over-indexing on a particular kind of technology. So 15 years ago, it was video, and there was like a moment where video was clunky in our learning experiences. And then within 5 years, there was way too much video, and video had kind of taken over to such a degree that we were seeing really, really poor experiences. So my perspective on all of this and learning is that you know, the medium is is less important than what happens inside of it, and the quality of the experiences that you can create, you know, depend a lot and somewhat on the medium. But that if you have bad experiences, and the medium can't save you, basically. And so what we've seen so far in kind of metaverse type experiments in our space, especially in kind of like leadership development and softer skills, is a lot of the programs tend to focus on the technology and the uniqueness of being present via the technology itself, but the programming, the actual learning experience design, and so on, just doesn't seem like it's, not even that it hasn't caught up, but it's kind of significantly worse than what you might see in a kind of non-VR context. So what I'm kind of looking and waiting and thinking about and trying to kind of, and I'm one of the reasons why I'm really interested to hear what Alicia and Rachel have to say about this, is just how we can draw on the unique elements of this, and if you have examples or have seen stuff like that, because I just haven't seen it yet, and that's what I'm sort of waiting for. Like, what are those kind of big transformative things that feel like, wow, I definitely couldn't have learned that, I couldn't have had that experience without being in a metaverse type environment. Adam, can you hear me? No, you really can't.
Matt's wrapped, Adam.
Yes, I listened on YouTube, so I found a workaround.
Love it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. Thank you. That was very good, Matt. I have a question prepared for each of the panelists, but I actually think that we can start with Matt's question before I ask mine, and Rachel and Alicia ask questions of the other panelists, and we open things up to the audience. So Rachel, Alicia, have either of you seen the kinds of examples that that Matt was asking about?
You want to go, Alicia?
Oh, I was going to ask a few minutes ago, but I can maybe start to address this. Maybe we can tag team this. So I think, you know, probably most people who are in this environment have seen the Chris Milk talking about VR as the ultimate empathy machine, right? And there is some research that demonstrates that you can create empathy by immersing people in experiences so that they can, quote, walk in another person's shoes in a way that they cannot do otherwise. That being said, I do agree that VR has the potential to be the ultimate empathy machine for now. And as we move into even more immersive experiences, like, remember I said we have 5 senses right now, we mostly just address 2 of them. But even with the environments the way that they are, I have seen real transformation in people's attitudes towards things like the state of refugees and the bombs over Sidra, after watching bombs over Sidra, or people's attitudes towards homelessness, or even with the Greenland melting is a 360 video experience. It's an immersive experience that you can actually watch on YouTube VR, so you can drop it into a headset, you can watch it on a flat screen, you can watch it in a more traditional or maybe higher end, more interactive VR headset, and people do express a sense of connection with experiences in a way that perhaps in 1920 people would have been this enthralled by a video, but now with people being very used to videos, people respond more viscerally to feeling like they're immersed in the environment, because of course they're dropped in and they can look all around and it feels more naturalistic for them. So I definitely can see people having experiences where they, quote, learn more in VR. And I say, quote, learn. This is an area I'm doing some research on about maybe ways to change our interface design around this. But I say, quote, learn, because people have attitude shifts in these immersive experiences. But so far what we see is people learn more didactic stuff actually better, not in VR. And of course I have some hypotheses about this, mainly all around the fact that when you're in VR, and you're able to like look down and see that you have feet and arms, and that you can actually see the ground of the ship, and you have control over what you're looking at, you might not actually be listening to the narrator who's telling you the information. So we can do something about that, though, and that's part of why we do research, is because we look at how the things we've designed are working and how to improve those designs. So for sure, yes, and a long and short answer, Matt, I have seen people's attitudes change. We just did a study with some journalism students about recovering from trauma, students who are talking about writing articles about recovering from trauma, and we showed them the environment where people are in solitary confinement. I think it's actually called solitary. And there's no real way to really experience solitary confinement, but when you're in a VR headset and you actually feel the narrowness of this room, because everything else around you is occluded, while you're in the headset, you really feel the sense of like, whoa, this is a lot worse than what I might have thought. And some students even reported feeling like a sense of being claustrophobic in that tiny space. So I also share your skepticism, Matt, about using VR and all kinds of immersive tools for just anything. But where I want to be. That's the space I want to be in. Rachel?
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because, I've seen some of the first VR. My mom worked for a software company called Alias that was bought by Wave, I think it was called Industrial Light and Magic. This is a million years ago. And it's a company in Toronto, and they had quote unquote VR machines, and they were hang gliders. And they were just like a single use. You got in this thing. It was the size of a phone booth. It was like an old school phone booth. They were massive. And it was mesmerizing. It was weird and janky. And it was just fun and entertaining. And, 20 some odd years later, there's been like 3 really sticky moments that are either multi-sensory, like you mentioned, or really, really designing for the platform, which ironically, one of them, the designers design in the physical space first. And that's a company that's not around anymore. They're called The Void. And they were phenomenal. And it's such a shame they didn't continue and survive, but they did, they worked on franchises like Ghostbusters and Star Wars. And the first time I ever put a headset on, they had a 1,500 square foot space in New York and Atlanta and LA and Toronto. And it was $45. And each person had their own PC. So you put a backpack on, and it was a shooter game. I don't necessarily advocate for, all the things to be shooter games, but the Ghostbusters one was absolutely perfect. And they used multi-sensory. So you walked through a physical space, and you could see the space, but you were in the VR headset. They used motion, they used air, they used smells throughout the space, and you felt like you were in it. And it was so much fun and so playful. And another example is another multi-sensory one, which is director, his name is Alejandro Inarritu. And he did a project called Carne y Arena, and it was about refugees, and very similar to trying to put somebody in the, the mindset or the physical space of an individual. You walk through a space where, you feel the gravel on your ground, you're dealing with the sounds, the external sound. So all elements and all factors are considered in unison, and it's not isolating you to a headset, which is probably one of the smartest things that we can do when we're thinking about designing for these. And a lot of the use cases end up being, entertainment. Utility has been an interesting one that I've had a hard time finding the best possible utility use case through VR. There was one which is for the U.S. defense, which was quite insightful. Basically, soldiers that were coming out or going through active duty, a lot of them didn't want to see therapists, like real people in person. So certain research companies help develop these basically like therapist bots. So just the way that I look right now, you could come in, you put a headset on, you sit and you talk to the therapist. And statistically, people shared more because there was a psychological perception that there was more anonymity with the process, which I thought was really interesting. I just thought, wow, that's the most impersonal thing I've ever heard of in my life. Like, you know, a therapist in PR, you don't know who it is, or you're not connecting with them. But that person literally just wants to be seen and be witnessed and get a lot of stuff off their chest, and have to go through the process of developing the relationship with them gets pushed aside when they're talking to what kind of appears to be a bot, but it's really a human, which I thought was quite insightful. Of the millions of projects, those three are probably the most interesting ones that I've experienced so far.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for the responses to Matt's question. And let's see, I had quick questions for all of the panelists, and then after that, I'd love if you all had questions for one another, like Matt asked of Rachel and Alicia. So my question for Alicia is twofold, actually. One is, I know that you're doing a lot of pioneering thinking and potentially research about what constitutes an effective immersive experience. And, you know, I think in particular when it comes to learning, but, you know, the research could also apply, the thinking could also apply to other environments. So I'm wondering, firstly, how do you benchmark what counts as an effective immersive experience? Like how are you thinking in those along those lines? And then the second is, as you've been working on metaverse-related research, are there particular research modalities, ways of investigating people's experience that have proven really effective or really successful, and some that haven't panned out? And do you think there are lessons there for the future of metaverse-related research and understanding the metaverse?
Okay, wow, those are great questions. Thank you. And I'd say, first of all, regarding how do you benchmark the effectiveness? I will say, obviously, and I say this, if you could see my face, I'm smirking when I say obviously, because you would think it's obvious, but it's actually not. That one of the ways to benchmark the effectiveness that people create and don't actually measure the learning outcomes. And when I say measuring learning outcomes, one of the things that the lab that I have and labs that I've worked with in the past have really tried to do is align our learning objectives with state and government standards for learning. So rather than me saying, for instance, I'm going to teach kids about STEM, I make my learning objectives very specific. Like, I'm going to teach kids about design thinking and how to apply design thinking to solve community problems. So things like that, first of all, benchmarking the effectiveness. But then the other thing that I think is really important to remind all designers and developers and people who are implementing the technology about is the importance of ease of use, right? It doesn't matter if you have a tool that you as a designer think would be so effective in teaching students about something if, for instance, every student who uses it vomits like 5 minutes in, right? So thinking about user testing and usability, user comfort, and a technology tool. And also we want to think about things like accessibility. Like for me, one of the goals for my lab is anything that we making it accessible in a VR headset, but also on a flat screen so that a student who is visually impaired could also engage with the technology, or a student maybe who has sensory issues and doesn't want to wear a headset could still engage on a flat screen, or a curved screen, or in a cave, any kinds of different environments. So thinking about the context of the learning and also the learning environment where students are going to engage with the learning, those are also important for the effectiveness. And then about research modalities, there are so many, of course. And I think my favorite one, since I am a human-computer interaction researcher, is looking at the system usability scale or other ways of measuring usability. Like, do people find a tool easy to use? Do they think they would use it in the future? Also, cognitive load. Like, if I'm supposed to be learning about STEM, but all I can think about is how confusing this environment is, or how I'm nauseous, or where are the buttons for this, then I'm not actually learning what I should be learning. And I will say, just because in the interest of time, I'm not going to monopolize our talk, but I will also say that I think it's so very important for students to get familiar with new tools before expecting them to learn in them. So if, for instance, students that I've worked with, middle school students, have really learned a lot from and felt engaged with the Anne Frank experience that's free on the Oculus. And before they use that Anne Frank experience, though, I just have them play some games in VR so they get used to navigating in a virtual environment, because it's confusing if you're new, and try if you're one of the people who's doing these implementations to put on the lens of someone new to a technology. So many things, like the first time you used Windows with the X in the top right corner to close a window, you wouldn't know that that's how you close a window. Now we know, and HCI principles tell us to be consistent so people can keep learning are using technologies that they're used to. But these technologies that we're inventing right now are brand new, and we have new ways of engaging and new ways of presenting information. So make sure you're giving people that you're trying to teach in these environments opportunities to engage and learn how to use them before you expect them to learn from them. I think,
yeah, I love it. Those are really good lessons, Alicia. And let's see, Rachel, I had a question for you. I thought the way you phrase the posited the relationship between kind of smart regulation and the evolution of technology and of the pace of adoption was really interesting. I think you said something like regulation has to move at that speed, the same speed that the technology is evolving and adoption is progressing. And I was wondering, given that you have such an incredible background, not only in strategy and innovation, but in research, what's the role of research in allowing regulation to move at the speed of technical evolution and adoption? That is, how do we know what's going on, and how should researchers be, studying what's happening, and then also informing policymakers, for instance, or corporate executives about the reality within the metaverse and around the metaverse, so that regulation and policy can actually keep pace with change?
I mean, we all know, research is the backbone of justifying and rationalizing, new policies and processes. And it's interesting. I was talking to somebody in a completely unrelated industry in construction, and we were talking about environmental changes to building practices. And basically, a large majority of the companies out there, they move when policy does, right? I mean, unless a company at a really high level has a philanthropic undertone, or the company is a triple bottom line company, or, ethics are fully embedded in the company, not native for them to be making certain decisions. And for a lot of companies, and I'm dealing with this right now, I just joined a new studio called Forward, and one of the tensions I had where I was before was that regardless of the compelling research to indicate that, we have the power to really positively shape people by adjusting our design guidelines, right? So asking questions when we're building technologies: does this have the potential to harm people? What does the safety look like? Making sure things are age gated, because there is COPA compliance, obviously, which is really, really amazing. But that's kind of base level. So all that being said, research will continue to have a big part in it, but the best way to make that research effective is to really synthesize your narrative. So, for example, there's amazing reports that XRSI does, and one of them reports very deep. It's very meaningful. There's a whole section that talks about making behavioral nudging algorithms, illegal, and providing guardrails around them. Now, that's the interesting part of that report's probably 30 pages. So our job as, say, academics and researchers is to pull out the narrative and tell the story in a really compelling way. And I don't think fear is the best motivator, but there needs to be something that inspires action, because as clearly indicated by millions of people like yourselves and, this organization like XRSI that's putting this on, is you've been screaming from the rooftops about this for a long time. It doesn't matter, right? Our issues and needs get deprioritized because the world is happening around us. We are not a unique one-of-a-kind snowflake. We're not the most important person in the room, whether you're in Congress or you're in Parliament, whatever country you're in. There's famines and there's other things that really, really matter. So we have to be as compelling as possible and use the research in a very succinct way so that we don't get stuck in a sea of published papers that are brilliant and interesting, but also hard to digest, which I got for years. My old boss used to say, "You should price this for me. Like talk to me like I'm a 4-year-old, because I don't need to know the words. I need to know what like the human implications are and what happens if I don't make these changes right now." And we know like a lot of this is risk mitigation for a lot of brands. So finding what the most important narrative is for your company or your organization or what you're building and really leaning into it. And then in some instances, just doing what matters to you. Like there's an agency called Rehab, which is similar to us, and they have a whole digital sustainability offering. And it's amazing. They have a whole first party data privacy offering. So companies can get on top of, when policy is going to change. So at the end of the day, if you've got research you want to do and research you've done, is finding the story and humanizing it and connecting it to what's most important to your stakeholder.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and I have to say, in my opinion, a lot of Rachel's thinking and writing and research does precisely that. And I think it's our hope that the joint research that Glimpse is doing along with XRSI, with Rachel and with Alicia, will bring to the fore some of those really important narratives about where the metaverse is, where the general public imagines it is, and the forms of regulation that might be beneficial. So I think Matt's here still, and I'm going to ask him a question and listen on YouTube. Matt, one thing that you've really emphasized at Nomadic is the relationship between the learning environment and the working environment, which is to say, you can learn something within the learning environment, but then translating what you've learned into the workplace is at least half the battle. And that isn't just true of, really concrete skills, but also of what we might call capabilities, where there needs to be recall triggered by the real world. And then there needs to be some kind of connection drawn in the brain between the working environment and whatever was learned in the digital environment. And, for all of the research, as Alicia pointed out, that shows that increased empathy is possible within immersive digital experiences, there's also some research which shows that once people leave those environments, sometimes the empathy doesn't actually translate into productive empathy, in the real world, especially when it comes to things like DEI issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which isn't to say that there's no hope, but I think that sometimes that moment of translation between the world of learning and the world of work, say, is sort of underthought. So I'm wondering, firstly, like, what do you do within Nomadic to think about that translation? And second of all, how might you imagine that translation working effectively when the metaverse evolves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to answer the kind of first question first is like, how do you do that? And one of the things that we focus most on is stories and narrative as kind of at the core of the curriculum, because if you are able to tell good stories that people relate to, they stick with people longer, and the lessons and things they draw out of them are generally easier to apply into context. And so, but then one of the kind of broader lessons about nomadic is, so we're dealing with adult learners in professional environments who are under extremely stressful situations. We usually have very, very limited amounts of time or attention. And so, you know, you can't really afford very much friction in that experience, and you have to have, what we found at least, is kind of like a kind of constant movement from one type of experience to a next across a sequence of learning moments that build together into a kind of narrative form. And so sometimes that's telling a story directly, sometimes it's thinking about a slightly like less traditional form of narrative, but from a designer perspective, you're thinking about, how does this 2-minute video lead into this quiz question, lead into this discussion, lead into this, you know, framework or text or something like that. And then, you know, one of the most important ways we do want to kind of practice empathy in conversation. So you want to kind of create opportunities for people to talk with each other. That's not, for us, that's rarely like in a synchronous or Zoom or, you know, or even like a metaverse type environment. It's finding ways to create asynchronous but meaningful dialogue and conversation. And when you know, if you can get all of those elements together, we can see that, you know, you can have a very, very real immediate impact on behavior that lasts, you know, not forever, but can have a very real impact, and you can measure outcomes and so on. So when I think about kind of in our world, like and I'm thinking a lot about kind of what Alicia and Rachel, you know, some of the examples they gave there in terms of like immersion and empathy and those kind of like, when do we have those types of experiences where that's like core to the thing that we're trying to teach in an enterprise learning environment? I can see some, you know, and I definitely can feel it. I think for something like DEI, which we've tried a lot of different ways, and I think the whole industry has tried a lot of different ways and tried and failed in a lot of different ways, I'm still somewhat skeptical about, like, you know, I think that yeah. I mean, the thing I worry about is creating like false empathy or false experiences, like where it's like, oh yeah, no, I do that. Like, you know, like your solitary confinement example, Alicia, is really interesting, but it's like, obviously not solitary confinement. So you don't want to give people the impression that they've actually experienced that. So it's like this balance of, you know, can you have something that approaches like true empathy in these types of experiences? But I think the other thing that, Alicia, I really kind of hold from your point there, which is like, this is especially true in our environment, which is like, people do not tolerate friction. We have 15 to 20 seconds to get people into an experience, and if we don't get them in and have something engaging happening within 20 seconds, we lost them. It doesn't happen. And so if it's a cumbersome, long, you know, thing that where it's a lot of confusion and the technical complexity dominates the experience, or especially the early parts of the experience, then for us, it's too far off. It's not going to work yet. We live in too fast of a world.
Thank you, Matt. That's great. And I realize that we're almost out of time. So unfortunately,
can I interject something really quick,
the chance
Adam?
to ask questions of one another unless the audience has no questions. But I think we have about 7 minutes left. And I want to see if there are questions from the audience.
Adam, can I add something really quick? Adam?
I'm going to say
I don't think he can hear
Alicia,
you.
for him. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say you can.
But you guys can hear. Okay, so
I can hear you. Yeah.
Adam asked me about efficacy. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure people leave here with is, one of the things that we try to do with training.
I guess there are
is
no
make
questions
sure,
from the audience?
Oh.
Alicia's
make
talking,
sure that.
Adam.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Is make sure that, maybe it's because I'm behind him. Maybe that's why. Can you hear me now? AT&T commercial. No. Okay, so one of the things though that we want to make sure people take away is a transfer to the real world, kind of like what Matt was just saying. It just occurred to me that I meant to say that and I hadn't said it. But one of the things that some of my research does is look at, you can learn something in a VR, but does it transfer to your real world experience? And we want to design things for education and training that don't just make you better in a lab or in your classroom, but actually make you better and more effective in the really real world. That's all.
Yes, that's great, Alicia. And I do think that that's sort of an under-researched area of the metaverse, which is to say, for the metaverse to be other than simply entertaining, for it to be effective, we have to think about and theorize its relationship to the real world. And I think that when we're creating metaverse experiences, immersive virtual experiences, we have to think about what happens when people put the goggles down and sort of reintegrate into the real world, whether it's a training experience, whether it's DEI, whether it's a kind of social networking experience or whatever. So let me just pause there and see if there are any questions from the audience. And if not, Rachel, why don't you ask the final question of one of our panelists?
Sure. Anybody have any questions before I ask? Cool. For both of you, and you, Adam, too, all of you, what do you think is the biggest single threat to an idealized future immersive world? Alicia, you want to start?
Sure, I will start because small plug, but not really, because I'm not going to tell you my username. I'm also a Twitch streamer. So I have very strong feelings on the concept of lacking moderation in spaces. So I think the thing I am most concerned about is lack of regulation and moderation in the metaverse. I'm already concerned about the lack of moderation on things like Twitter and Facebook. But I'm even more concerned when we think about people having embodied selves in the metaverse and the possibility of those embodied selves not being protected.
Good one. Adam, what about you? Good one.
Yeah, I think that I'm concerned that the political economy of the metaverse will limit the possibilities for creation and for emergent behaviors and possibilities and even politics in a similar way to what I think and many other people think, of course, happened in the transition from Web 1.0 to 2.0. I think the idea that there's a lot of decentralization, new possibilities for expression. And I think that it's not so much, of course, there are certain countries that will censor the metaverse within their own borders. They'll try to for their own people. But I think the primary danger is a kind of corporate encirclement of different areas of the metaverse such that truly creative forms of dialogue and governmentality are sort of rendered unthinkable or impossible. And I think that one of the great things that organizations like XRSI, are doing is thinking about ways to keep that space open and keep those possibilities open.
Cool. Matt, you want to close it out with your largest single threat to the future?
I guess, well, it's a very hard one. I mean, I think one of the largest threats, I mean, I don't know if this is a true threat, but like, I think that I think a near-term threat is a kind of an overinflation of expectations and a kind of collapse of the economy before it can really move into the kind of like idealized space. So, and maybe that's just a natural part of it, but I do think that like there's a danger in it, in boring, and being in not boring, but there's a danger in like not moving fast enough to the true creative potential of the medium, and then like the infrastructure and the things that needed to really get it there don't actually evolve fast enough to kind of, there's like a downward spiral effect of like people don't have the right experiences and they don't come back basically, and then that in and of itself could like strip resources and attention and creativity from the space.
Yeah, good insight.
Well, hey, can we get some emojis for all of our amazing
That is a great
panelists up here
insight.
today?
So let's work to make sure that that doesn't happen. And our time is up. So I want to thank all of the panelists for being so thoughtful and contributing to the discourse around the metaverse. And again, as Alicia said, and as I said, and as your emails to you suggested, please fill out the survey so we can learn more about what you think about the metaverse and its future, and you can join the conversation in a really substantive way, and we can sort of move forward together. We hope to hear from all of you, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So, if I could just have you guys exit the stage right there. Thank you. Hey, everybody. So we are going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break, and we will be right back. Don't forget to hydrate, use the restroom, get caffeine, eat something probably if you've been inside of a headset all day. Now would be the perfect time to do so. A little bit of self-care, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.